Hello, welcome back. This is A Course in Miracles. It's a required course. I didn't say that. I didn't write that. Yeah, I always think about that. However, this is the way back at the intro, not in the workbook, but how can we actually say, right? How can Jesus actually say it's required? Well, actually it is. It's the process that's required, isn't it? It's the decision that's required. It's the choice moment to moment for love over fear that's required. It's not required that you pick up A Course in Miracles itself, not at all. Because spirituality is universal and we're all doing the same process because that's what each spiritual tradition, whatever they may say outwardly about it, is all about. So, therefore, we can easily say it's required because it is required that we give up ego clinging. Isn't it? For sure. And lesson 258 that we're going to cover today, it plays right into that. It just continues this theme, and it's let me remember that my goal is God. Let me remember that my goal is God. My goal is not a brand new refinanced mortgage, which might be real nice if you got that. All right. My goal is not a brand new Mercedes. Again, might be super cool if you have that. My goal is not a hot, sexy new partner. Again, might be real cool if you have that. My goal is God. It's the peace of God. So the words that appear in conjunction with today's idea, both the statement and the italicized prayer are really important. So I really want to draw your attention to those and invite you to focus in on that. Focus in on what this says. Because in life, we have many goals that occupy our time. They occupy our energy. They consume our relationships. And if they don't lead to where we're going, to the peace of God, they don't help us. As we see on this path, none of the things that we worship, and I'm going to use the word worship for sure, in the world even ultimately exist. With that said, it really actually only leaves one possible goal, and it really only leaves one possible outcome, which we cannot stop. You can't stop it. You're watching a video on A Course in Miracles. You think you can go back? You know you can't, right? I can't, we can't, I don't want to. So ideally, you don't want to either, right? There's one outcome. You're headed that way. The question on the path for each of us becomes, will we delay this inevitability? Will we delay our immersion, our experience as the peace of God? Are we delaying our homecoming, so to speak, even though we're not going anywhere? Are we delaying awakening? Because we can choose that. Choosing fear in the present moment, choosing the ego is delay. We can put off the inevitable up to a point. I mean, at some point, it becomes too painful. It becomes too excruciating and grueling to throw up one brick of resistance after another. Better to just tear the whole wall down. Or just acknowledge that there's no wall and there are no bricks. They're not real. How do we do this? Forgiveness. In dismantling a wall, it's not about making it an enemy. So while in the world we use images like tearing down a wall or taking dynamite to it or something like that, it's important that we understand that it doesn't exist. There's no separate us and separate them. There's no separate object. There's no body looking at a wall or a barrier. So when we say removing barriers, we're not doing it with violent force. We're not making the barrier an enemy. We're simply acknowledging that it does not exist and leaving it. It just disappears. This is what happens when we forgive, is the perceived problem disappears. It vanishes. It's turning on a light. It is like flicking on a light switch that cancels the darkness. It just vanishes. There's nothing we need to do about it. If we flick the light on, the room becomes light. There's no darkness anymore. And this light bulb never burns out. If you liken forgiveness to a light bulb, it never burns out. The filament never burns out, breaks, and falls to the bottom of the bulb. It's impossible. We could choose not to turn on the light. We could walk about, which is what we do in the world in our ego-clinging ways and our habitual tendencies. We stumble about in the darkness thinking we know how to find our way. And we don't. We trip into every single object in our path. We run into the walls. We fall down, maybe even hurt ourselves. Sometimes really badly. And lesson 258 just wants us to remind ourselves that our goal is God. Let me remember today, right now, that my goal is God. And roll with that, because these lessons are so similar, aren't they? I want the peace of God. Above all else, I want to see, right? I want to see with the vision of Christ. I want to see things as the Holy Spirit sees them. So we remember that our goal is God. It's the only goal, the only outcome, because it's all that is. It's one way of roundabout explaining the very disarmingly simple statement, God is. So, too, is God's Son. Only God is. So let that stand as your goal today and every day. And when you get carried away, because you will, right? I will, we all do. We get carried away and stuff. My wife and I are starting a process of moving. We're moving to a different part of town. And there's a whole big list of tasks to do. Lots of moving parts. And you may be involved in something like that yourself, but even if you're not, still, nevertheless, there's a lot of shit to juggle sometimes, isn't there? And we need to take time out, even if it's only a few seconds, to remind ourselves, let me remember my goal is God. But let me come back to that. Let me come back to that as many times as I can and must throughout the day. And I invite you to do the same. Use whatever mnemonic devices, whatever anchors suit you. And I don't doubt that you've got a lot of those now. This is lesson 258. So as you've been following along here in the workbook, you will have discovered some anchors, some reminders, some tools that work for you, whether it's setting an alarm on your watch or posting notes throughout the day, some place where you'll see them, whatever it looks like for you. As often as you remember your goal today, bring your attention back to that. And while you're at it, forgive something or someone. Forgive yourself, because that's ultimately what we're doing. And as we've seen in many lessons throughout this workbook, that is our purpose. That was the purpose in our last lesson, lesson 257. Let me remember what my purpose is. So let me remember today that my goal is God. All right. We'll see you later.